On Thanksgiving Day, when most people dream of warmth, family, and a seat at the table, Oliver stood outside with nothing but a bottle of wine and a trembling hope. He was 28, a gay man who had spent his entire life carrying the weight of being invisible in the very family that should have lifted him up. Every holiday felt like a cruel reminder that he was remembered only for his mistakes and forgotten for every quiet victory. His mother carried a sharp tongue like a weapon, one that never spared him. She could list every flaw he ever showed, yet the birthday cards he saved up for, the times he stepped in to help her, the small ways he tried to earn her love, those vanished like smoke in her memory. His sister Ava had learned the performance early. She smiled, she curtsied, she charmed, and the family crowned her as the golden child. While she basked in applause, and Oliver was always the shadow, too blunt, too skeptical, too unwilling to play the role of perfection that their family demanded. He had grown used to the ritual. Bring a gift, even when no one asked him to come. Wear a smile, even when no one wanted to see his face. Pretend the sting of exclusion did not sit heavy on his chest. But deep down, the ache never left. It festered quietly, like a scar beneath the skin, carried year after year until it became part of who he was. This year, though, Oliver told himself he would show up not for his mother, not for Ava, not even for the family that had spent decades erasing him. He would come for the one person who had ever seen him for who he truly was, his cousin Maya. She had never treated him as a burden, never asked him to perform. Her laughter had been the only genuine sound at those suffocating dinners, the only proof that he was not entirely forgotten. That fragile bond was reason enough for him to walk toward the familiar house, gripping the bottle of wine as if it were both a gift and a shield. The November air cut sharp across his skin. The house was lit, warm, echoing with voices. The smell of roasted turkey drifting even into the yard. He could almost pretend, for one flickering second, that maybe this year would be different. Maybe someone inside would remember that he belonged too. Maybe the seat with his name on it would still be there. His heart beat louder with every step closer to the door, until at last he lifted his hand to knock. Before he could, the door swung open, and there he was, Uncle Ron, standing like a guard with a coldness that bit harder than the winter air. Ron's eyes narrowed, not in welcome but in warning. The space behind him glowed with the life of the family gathered, but Oliver could not take a single step inside. Ron's voice cut through the night, sharp and final. You're not family anymore. The words landed heavier than any slam of the door could. For a moment, Oliver froze in place, unable to breathe. He glimpsed the laughter spilling from within, the clinking of glasses, the world that carried on as if his existence meant nothing. The bottle of wine felt suddenly useless in his hand. In the silence that followed, he was no longer just excluded, he was erased. And yet, that was the moment something shifted inside him. The years of being forgotten, dismissed, reduced to a shadow, suddenly they pressed forward, demanding not silence but a reckoning. Oliver realized this Thanksgiving would not be like the others. He was done waiting for their permission to belong. For everyone listening now, this is not only Oliver's story, it is the story of what happens when truth is buried for too long, when one person decides to stop begging for a place at the table and begins carving their own path. You are watching Heart Story, where stories like Oliver's remind us that even in the darkest rejection, there can be the seed of freedom. Stay with us until the end, because what happens after this door is shut will shatter every mask that family has worn for years. And somewhere in Oliver's silence, there is a reminder we all need sometimes. The most painful rejections are the beginning of the truest liberation. The door closed with a dull finality, the sound of the latch clicking echoing louder in Oliver's chest than any storm outside. He stood frozen on the porch, his breath rising like smoke against the night air. The bottle of wine hung limply in his hand, its glass chilled like his fingers, as if mocking the hope he had carried here. Through the thin sliver of space where the curtain didn't fully meet the frame, he caught a glimpse of the table inside, the chair that once bore his name. The seat he had tried to hold on to in years past was no longer his. Instead, it had been offered without hesitation to Ava's boyfriend, who laughed easily, oblivious to the history of the space he now occupied. Oliver's mother sat tall, her smile wide, raising her glass as if to toast the perfection of a family portrait that never included him. She tilted her head with practiced grace, nodding at jokes, leaning close to Ava, pretending with effortless cruelty that her only son was nothing more than a forgotten memory. It wasn't a matter of oversight, it was intentional, a choice rehearsed so many times it had become second nature. For them, the absence of Oliver had become the centerpiece of their gathering songs, a silence that allowed their performance of unity to go uninterrupted. He had endured this role before, standing outside the glow, but this night carried a different weight. He no longer felt like a forgotten shadow. He felt the crushing certainty of erasure, the deliberate rewriting of his existence as though he had never belonged at all. His pulse quickened, not with despair this time, but with a sharpness that burned through his veins. The years of being dismissed had carved scars deep into him, yet they had also left behind a clarity. He would no longer carry the shame that was never his to hold. With slow precision, Oliver slipped his phone from his pocket. He had prepared for this moment, though part of him had prayed he would never need to use it. Stored within were fragments of years-past recordings of his mother belittling him in front of relatives, screenshots of Ava mocking him in private messages, texts where family members twisted his sexuality into a weapon against him. There were photographs, too, reminders of when he had helped pay bills that weren't his responsibility, evidence of sacrifices he had made while being told he was selfish. These pieces of truth had sat like stones in his chest, heavy, waiting. His thumb hovered only briefly before he sent them. The group chat that his family adored for planning dinners and vacations lit up with the weight of his evidence. One after another, the files poured out like an unrelenting tide, a curated anthology of the deception and manipulation they had cloaked themselves in for years. Words that had once cut him now stood as proof, unedited, undeniable. As the screen dimmed, Oliver exhaled. His breath shook, but not from fear. There was a strange stillness in him, an unfamiliar relief. For once, he was not swallowing his pain to keep their peace. He had chosen honesty, even if it meant shattering the fragile facade they clung to. From inside the house came no immediate response, only the muffled sounds of forks scraping plates, glasses clinking, voices blending into a chorus of celebration. Yet Oliver knew the silence was temporary. The fuse had been lit, and the house behind him was nothing more than a stage set about to collapse under the weight of truth. He walked slowly back toward his car, the gravel crunching beneath his shoes, the bottle of wine still in his hand, though now it felt like nothing more than glass and liquid, stripped of its meaning. As he sat behind the wheel, the first vibration rattled his phone, a message unread, then another, then a flood. The chain reaction had begun. What Oliver had unleashed it was not an act of vengeance, it was the inevitable consequence of years of injustice left unchecked. For too long, he had been told that silence was dignity, that endurance was strength. But silence had only allowed cruelty to grow bolder. In pressing send, he had reminded himself of something vital. Truth is not an act of destruction, it is the foundation of freedom. The glow of the screen lit up Oliver's face as he sat in his car, his hands trembling around the steering wheel. The flood of messages kept coming, sharp words, questions, accusations, yet amid the chaos, there was also silence, the kind that meant people were reading, staring, processing what they had never dared to acknowledge. He could almost hear the cracks spreading through the walls of that dining room. Even though he was parked outside in the November dark, inside the celebration was faltering. Maya was the first to rise. She had always been the quiet defender, the one who looked at Oliver with recognition when no one else would. Now she stood from the table, her chair scraping against the polished floor, her eyes blazing. Without a word, she walked away from the dinner that had been staged as perfection, her steps echoing down the hall. Others tried to stop her, but she did not look back. Daniel followed next, his voice cutting into the murmurs of disbelief. He had once admired the family's veneer, convinced by the stories of harmony and loyalty. Now, with proof in his hands, he could not stay seated at a table built on lies. He too left, the door swinging in his wake, leaving behind a silence heavy with judgment. What Oliver had released spread faster than he could have imagined. Friends who had always admired the so-called family dynamic began calling out the hypocrisy. Cousins whispered in corners. Messages buzzed across phones. Social media stirred with fragments of the truth. What once seemed like an unshakable structure of respectability fractured in real time. Oliver sat with his phone buzzing in the cup holder, his body trembling, yet a strange sense of release pressed through his chest. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just a forgotten shadow standing outside a window. He wasn't the one carrying the shame of others' cruelty. He had handed the truth back to the people who created it. The burden was no longer his. His cousin's name flashed across the screen. Maya's voice carried through the speaker, low but unyielding. "Why didn't you tell me you had been keeping all of this? Why didn't you say you had the proof?" Oliver stared at the windshield, the reflection of his own weary eyes staring back. His voice came steady, quieter than he expected. "Because I didn't want you caught in the fire. I didn't want you blamed for standing with me. But maybe you've been standing here all along, even when I thought I was alone." Her silence on the line was heavier than any words, a silence filled with understanding. The vibrations of his phone didn't stop. Relatives texted in fury, others in apology. Old friends reached out, stunned by what they had seen. Every ping reminded Oliver Bavin that his decision had broken through years of silence, and now the ripples touched everyone who had played a part. He leaned back in his seat, his chest rising and falling, his hands still shaking, but the tremor was no longer from fear. It was the body's weight of releasing years of captivity. He let the phone buzz without answering, staring into the quiet night, letting the storm rage without him. For the first time, he did not feel powerless. What began as a dinner turned into a reckoning. A family once proud of its flawless mask now stood exposed. Their unity nothing more than an illusion. The lies had been convenient, but truth has a way of demanding air. Oliver had not destroyed them. They had destroyed themselves by choosing deception over compassion. All he had done was open the door they had locked shut for years. There, in the dark, Oliver understood something he had never allowed himself to believe. Silence is not strength when it means carrying the weight of other people's cruelty. Real strength comes in choosing truth, even when it trembles in your hands. And sometimes the act of breaking free does not come with applause. It comes with the simple, unshakable relief of no longer living beneath a lie. That night, the house that had once been a fortress of appearances crumbled from the inside. The dining table, once gleaming with dishes and laughter rehearsed for show, now felt hollow as chairs emptied one by one. The people who remained sat stiff, avoiding one another's eyes, their screens glowing with Oliver's words and evidence. Denial was no longer possible. The mask had been stripped away, and what lingered was a silence far heavier than any argument. Away from the chaos, a knock fell on Oliver's apartment door. He opened it to find Aunt Laura, her coat draped loosely, her face pale under the weight of what she had seen. For years, she had accepted the narrative spun by his mother, believing the words that painted Oliver as difficult, selfish, or undeserving. Now, with the truth laid bare, she could not keep silent. She confessed her regret, admitting that she had chosen comfort over curiosity, that she had believed a story simply because it was easier than asking her own questions. "I see it now," she said, her voice fragile. "We were wrong. I was wrong." Her presence was not triumph for Oliver, but a strange kind of release. For the first time, someone from within that family admitted what he had always known. The cruelty had not been his imagination, nor his fault. It was the choice of others to preserve an image instead of honoring a person. Meanwhile, on social media, the storm grew louder. His mother rushed to frame herself as the victim. Her posts filled with lines about betrayal, about being misunderstood, about her sacrifices for children who supposedly never gave back. She sought sympathy, painting herself as a martyr whose family had turned against her. But the responses did not go the way she expected. One by one, relatives began to respond, not in private but openly, recounting their own memories. A cousin recalled being spoken about behind her back. An uncle remembered a time Oliver had lent money quietly, with no acknowledgement, while the family pretended it was someone else's generosity. Another relative admitted that Oliver had helped him through college applications, only to watch him be dismissed as if he contributed nothing. The myth unraveled in public view. What had been carefully hidden became collective memory, too large to contain. Each comment became a mirror reflecting not only Oliver's pain, but the broader pattern of manipulation that had bound them all. The family split along the fault lines of truth. Some clung to the old image, insisting on loyalty to appearances. Others chose to stand with honesty, no matter how uncomfortable. Through it all, Oliver did not need to speak. His name, once whispered as if it carried shame, now became the axis around which every revelation turned. The boy they had tried to erase became the catalyst for every hidden story that surfaced. In being cast aside, he had forced the family to face itself. Yet there was no joy in the division. Oliver sat quietly as messages reached him, some apologizing, others lashing out. He felt neither victory nor defeat. Only the deep ache of recognition the family he had longed for had never truly existed in the way he had hoped. It had been a performance, one he was no longer willing to play a part in. Still, there was something to be learned in the wreckage. Oliver realized that when people refuse to confront the harm they cause, they end up living in the ruins of their own making. His silence had once protected them, but it also chained him. By choosing truth, he had not broken the family. He had given them the chance to choose who they wanted to be when faced with reality. Some would cling to the past, but others, like Aunt Laura, had chosen honesty and compassion. The lesson was clear. Protecting an illusion may feel safe in the moment, but illusions always shatter. What endures is the courage to face truth, even when it tears apart the stories we have told ourselves. For Oliver, this night was not about revenge, but about finally stepping out from the shadows, leaving behind a stage that had never been his to begin with. The weeks slipped by, carrying the aftershocks of Thanksgiving into the quieter stretch of December. For Oliver, the nights felt stiller, yet heavier. He had torn away the mask that had suffocated him for years. But freedom was not without cost. Invitations stopped coming. Some relatives cut him off completely, while others reached out in secret, unsure of which side to stand on. Through it all, only Maya remained constant, checking on him, reminding him that telling the truth had not destroyed him, it had saved him. As Christmas drew closer, a letter arrived. The envelope was plain, the handwriting shaky, the kind that carried age and hesitation. Oliver stared at it for a long while before opening, almost afraid of what words could still wound him. Inside was not anger, not defense, but something he had never expected. It was from his father. The letter trembled with confession. His father admitted what Oliver had always sensed but never heard aloud. When you were 13, it read, "Your mother told me you had ruined the wall with your drawings. She said you were reckless, selfish, and ungrateful. I believed her without even looking. I let her shame you while I stayed silent. I see now what I refused to admit, that I wasn't afraid of drawings on a wall. I was afraid of what those drawings revealed. I was afraid you were different. I was afraid you were gay." Oliver's eyes blurred as he read the lines again and again. For years, his father's silence had been the deepest wound, deeper even than his mother's sharp tongue. To see it acknowledged, to see his father finally speak the truth, felt like a piece of air returning to lungs that had long been starved. The letter did not end with regret alone. "I am not proud of the man I was," his father wrote, "but I want to change before it's too late. I am not afraid anymore. If you will allow it, I want to begin again, not as a family pretending for appearances, but as a father learning to love the son he once abandoned." For Oliver, the words did not erase the years of pain. They did not rebuild the family that had shattered, but they offered something he had long given up on a new beginning. Not with everyone, but with the one person whose silence had hurt him most. On Christmas morning, he met his father in a quiet cafe. The man looked smaller than Oliver remembered, but when their eyes met, there was no performance, no mask. Only a trembling honesty that had been missing all his life. His father reached across the table, not demanding forgiveness, but asking for the chance to try him. And for the first time, Oliver did not feel like the forgotten son begging for a place. He felt seen exactly as he was. The healing did not come from a grand reconciliation. It came from the smallest gesture two people, once divided by fear, choosing truth instead of silence. Oliver no longer needed a seat at the Thanksgiving table to prove his worth. He had found something greater, the freedom of his own voice, the loyalty of Maya, and a father willing to face his failures with humility. As he left the cafe that day, the world outside glittered with lights strung for the holiday season. The cold air felt less biting, almost gentle, as though the world itself had shifted. He realized that true belonging does not come from a family bound by image, but from those willing to embrace you as you are, no matter how long it takes them to learn. And now, to you listening, if you were Oliver, would you let a father who once turned away have a second chance? Or is some silence too deep to forgive? Comment below and tell us what you believe, because every story we share here is a chance to speak truth louder than shame. You are watching Heart Stories. Subscribe, share, and keep standing with us, because stories like Oliver's remind the world of this one truth: love is never a weakness, silence is.